having survived 3 wars in one of the world's most volatile regions. My comments today will focus on 4 subparts. The first will be the context of which the Indus Waters Treaty arose. The second will be the dispute resolution mechanism of the Indus Waters Treaty. The third will be an analysis of how that dispute resolution system has worked in practice. And the fourth will be recommendations on how the Indus Waters Treaties can be modernized in lieu of the current abeyance. So in terms of context, issues over water rights existed pre-partition, including the 1935 Anderson Commission and the 1941 Robb Commission. Shortly after partition, there was a series of temporary treaties which ended on March 31st, 1948, when the water resources from the East Punjab were cut off and diplomacy at the highest level between Liaquat Ali Khan and Nehru were required to address that issue. Following those temporary treaties, you had the Delhi Agreement, which was a mechanism to address issues but had no formal resolution system. In that context, in the 1950s, the World Bank stepped in to serve as a moderator for these disputes in exchange for financial resources to both India and Pakistan. And as a result, we have what is the 1960 Indus Waters Treaty. And under the treaty, the dispute resolution mechanism is very robust. Initially, there's a permanent Indus Commission where both India and Pakistan appoint a commissioner who are to discuss disagreements or what are called questions. If they're unable to resolve their disagreements, then there's a 2-tier system. The first tier is a neutral expert who under Annex F has jurisdiction over 23 delineated topics, which are mostly technical issues. Concurrently, there's a permanent court of arbitration who has jurisdiction over legal and all other issues. Now, we've seen these mechanisms at work in place and before. For example, the neutral expert was appointed to address the Baghdad Dam, while the permanent court of arbitration was appointed to address the Kishinganga arbitration. So, what are the issues we're seeing? There are primarily 3. One is the amount of time it takes to resolve these issues. So, for example, in the first dispute over the Baghdad Dam, the designs were shared in 1992. The issue wasn't resolved by the neutral expert until 2007, 15 years. In terms of Kishinganga, Pakistan launched its objection in 1988. It took over 20 years to have that dispute resolved. And what are we seeing? India is continuing to construct dams during its entire period. So at the point where you do have a decision, it's too little, too late because of the investment that's already been made. You have arbitrators who are hesitant to make a decision to stop the construction or revert it back to its original place. Moreover, as the barrister mentioned, in the latest dispute over Rattle, Pakistan raised the issue in August 2016 and requested the appointment of a permanent court of arbitration, versus India 1 month later required a neutral expert to weigh in on the issue. The World Bank stood silent for 5 years, and what did we have in 2003? Both the neutral expert and the permanent court of arbitration saying we both have jurisdiction over this dispute, which could lead to inconsistent rulings and inefficiencies. So how do we resolve these issues? I think there are 3 primary mechanisms. The first, the barrister addressed this, we need the World Bank to play a more prominent role. They are actually a 3rd signatory on the treaty and have been in that position since 1960. India is scheduled to get $156 billion of future funding from the World Bank. The World Bank can demand compliance through various reporting mechanisms, data mechanisms, ensure that that funding is actually tied to compliance with international obligations. The second The UN Security Council can refer the International Court of Justice for an advisory opinion about whether an abeyance, specifically a unilateral abeyance, is lawful under the Indus Waters Treaty. It is likely that the International Court of Justice would be very skeptical about this, because in 1997 they issued a ruling saying that the dispute between Hungary and Slovakia and a temporary cessation of waterway treaties was not lawful. The second mechanism, the last mechanism we can see is modernizing the actual dispute resolution practice through procedural mechanisms that we see in modern day arbitrations. So once again, this is a treaty from 1960, and for that time, it had robust dispute resolution mechanisms, but in the last 60 years, those have evolved in modern day arbitrations. And there are three specific items that we can see implemented in the Indus Waters Treaty. First is adoption of rules such as Eiksid or Uncentraal, which were actually used by the neutral expert in deciding his rule. You can have a pool of emergency arbitrators that both sides can agree on in order to put in temporary measures so that dam construction is halted as these decisions are made, and there are not the economic and ecological consequences on the lower riparian. And finally, we need to change the jurisdictional mechanism where jurisdiction lies only with one body. For example, the jurisdiction for the Indus Waters Treaty can be compartmentalized to one permanent court of arbitration who can then appoint a neutral, if need be, rather than two differing bodies who hold that concurrent jurisdiction as we see in the rattle dispute. These mechanisms will ensure that unilateral hydrohegemony is not practiced by either party. Thank you.